What do you say to someone who has experienced a loss? More important question, what do you not say to someone after they've experienced a loss? In the book, Modern Loss by Rebecca Sofer and Gabrielle Berkner, there's a section about the things not to say to mourners. Here are the top 3. I know just how you feel. At least you have your health. This will only make you stronger. Anyone ever been on the receiving end of a comment like that? I suspect many of us have been, and I imagine that there are also many of us who have made comments that we regret. I know I have. It comes from a good place, but sometimes the words just don't come out right. At the graveside, at the Shiva house, or seeing someone after a loss, it can be hard to find the right words to say. And often, there are no right words to say. Still, our tradition gives us words to share with mourners at these difficult moments. When we hear that someone has passed away, we say, Baruch Dayan HaEmet, blessed is the true judge. Mourners also say this before tearing their clothing or the ribbon attached to their clothing at the beginning of a funeral service. This blessing expresses our humility in the face of loss. Another traditional expression, Yehi Zichro Baruch, may his or her memory be for a blessing. Its origin is in the book of Proverbs, where we read, Zecher Tzadik Livracha, the memory of the righteous is a blessing. And it's caught on in popular culture, perhaps because it expresses comfort for the mourners while also affirming that someone's legacy will endure after they're gone. You know those letters, ZL, that you see sometimes after a name for someone who's passed away? That's an abbreviation for Zecher Livracha, may their memory be for a blessing. And there's another phrase that gives us words to say at a time of loss that I think is even more powerful. Hamakom Yenachem Etchem B'toch Sharvalei Tzion V'Rushalayim. May God have comfort upon you in the midst of the mourners of Zion and Jerusalem. We first say this to mourners as they walk away from the graveside after the burial, usually through a line formed by friends. It is also traditional to share these words with mourners during the 7 days of Shiva. After losing his mother, Rabbi Danny Nevins wrote an article in her memory about the origin and meaning of these words. He explains how the first word for God is hamakom, which literally means the place. The rabbis of the Talmud use hamakom as a name for God in contexts where we hope that God's presence is most keenly felt. He goes on to explain the meaning of comfort and exactly who those mourners of Zion and Jerusalem are. But what I found most interesting is what he says about the seemingly simple word right in the middle of this phrase, betoch, which means along with, or even better, in the midst of. Rabbi Nevins notes that this same word is used elsewhere in the Talmud as a source for the requirement of 10 people to make a minyan. He writes, while it is true that only the mourner knows his own grief, the minyan, this microcosm of Israel, this community of comfort, will allow him to escape isolation. Our daily minyan at TBS, along with our Shabbat and holiday services, have done this for countless people over the years. How many of you have experienced the comfort of minyan? A lot of you. Being in community with others who have also experienced losses, saying together the mourner's Kaddish, other powerful words we say at a time of loss, can certainly help us process our grief and bring us some comfort during a difficult time. Over the years, many of you have shared how your experience of saying Kaddish with our community has helped during your time of loss. Standing betoch in the midst of a minyan, or even joining virtually, can provide the strength and the support we need during a challenging time. But it strikes me that this word betoch also describes how we gather together here today on Yom Kippur for Yizkor. We each recall the memories of those who we miss dearly, our mothers and fathers, brothers and sisters, spouses, and children. And we do this betoch, in the midst of others who bring their own memories today. At our Rosh Hashanah tables or our pre-fast meals last night, I'm sure that we called our loved ones as well, as we saw the empty chairs where they used to sit. But there is also something powerful about doing it here together as a community. We may recall sitting in shul with our parents who were saying Yizkor for their parents, our grandparents. Or perhaps we even remember our grandparents saying Yizkor for their parents. And now it's our turn. We can look around the sanctuary and remember sitting with our loved ones. As I look out right now, I see the faces of beloved members of our community where they used to sit, betoch, in the midst of all of us. Do you look around this room and see them too? While each of us is betoch in the midst of our TBS community, we're also betoch in the midst of the Jewish people. We know that today, at this moment, around the world, communities are gathering together to pray, to reflect, to remember, and if you're in Jerusalem right now, just about now, to eat, because their fast has just about ended. Sorry. But it was when Rachel and I were in Jerusalem this past summer that I really got a sense of the meaning of the last half of those words we say to mourners, Betoch Shara B'lei Tzion Yerushalayim, in the midst of the mourners of Zion and Jerusalem. As we all know, there are too many mourners in Israel these days, as the days of conflict after October 7th continue. I don't know of anyone whose life has not been touched by loss. And nearly everywhere Rachel and I went to see friends in the north, to visit family outside of Tel Aviv and in Jerusalem, we felt it. As we sat with friends and family to catch up, you just had to scratch the surface a little bit. Just ask, how are you really doing? And then it all came out. The exhaustion from the reserve duty, the middle of the night missile attacks, the bomb shelters, the financial strain, the kids out of school. In addition to all this, the memories of those who've been lost. There's so much they are holding right now. It is impossible to be in Israel and not feel betoch in the midst of the grief that surrounds. And one of the places that I felt this most acutely was at Hakel, the prayer community that has become our Jerusalem shul. A number of years ago, we ran into a friend of Rachel's from college who had made Aliyah after he graduated and is one of the leaders of this community. He invited us to come, and when we went, we discovered old friends there and made new ones and always enjoy reconnecting with them when we're there for Shabbat. Not only has this given us a community in Israel, it also provides us with a window into the sadness and the joy that so many have been going through these last 2 years. Hakel also happens to be the community of John and Rachel Goldberg Poland. When I was in Israel a few months into the war, I joined a Hakel-led prayer and song service for the hostages, singing and praying with all our hearts betoch in the midst of Jerusalem. And then last summer, I joined them as they dedicated a Torah for Hirsch, who at the time was still alive. Once again, I stood betoch in the midst of the community. And once again, we sang prayers and songs like Achenu that we just sang here a few moments ago, betoch, along with communities around the world. And when I returned again this past winter and I walked into services on that Shabbat morning, something felt different, heavier. This community was now burdened by grief. Hirsch had been killed a few months earlier. Now they had also lost Yuval Shoham, a 22-year-old soldier and dear friend of Hirsch's. Yuval's parents, Oshra and Effie, now stood with John and Rachel in the back of the shul to say Kaddish together. We know the Jewish world is small, and in Jerusalem it is even smaller. While Hakel mourned the deaths of Hirsch and Yuval, another community in an adjacent neighborhood mourned the death of Rabbi Avi Goldberg. Rav Avi, as he was called, was the first IDF chaplain killed in battle since the Yom Kippur War. He is survived by his wife and his 8 children. And Rav Avi was also the high school teacher of Hirsch and Yuval. And these losses created a circle of grief. After Hirsch died, it was Yuval's parents, Oshra and Effie, who helped Hirsch's parents get up from Shiva. And then, at the end of Shiva for Rav Avi, it was Rav Avi's father-in-law, Rabbi Tzvi Wolf, who had been Rachel Goldberg Poland's teacher, who helped his family get up from Shiva. And then finally, at the conclusion of Shiva for Yuval, it was John and Rachel who help lift up Oshrat and Effie, completing a painful yet poignant circle. It's such a tragic version of Jewish geography. Each of these losses were unimaginably painful. Still, each family experienced their loss betoch, in the midst of a community and a country that reaches out its hands in comfort. It can't take away the pain, but perhaps it helped soften it a bit. And then this summer in Jerusalem, Rachel and I went to a solidarity gathering that included Oshrat and Effie and John and Rachel and members of Rav Avi's community as well. Everyone in the neighborhood had come together after services on Shabbat morning in the shadow of loss, but also in the name of the bonds that connected them. People shared words of comfort, sang songs, and prayed that the 50 hostages at the time would still come home, so they too could be betoch in the midst of their people. This is one powerful example of how being betoch in the midst of family, friends, and community can support and sustain during a time of loss. Have you had an experience like this? Felt comforted in the midst of others? Been there for someone else in their time of need? That's the power of betoch. There's a teaching in the Mishnah that describes how mourners were comforted during the time of the temple. Rabbi Nevins thinks that it could be one of the source texts for those words of comfort, Hamakom Yenachem. May God comfort you along in the midst of the mourners of Zion and Jerusalem. Here's how the Mishnah begins. All who entered the Temple Mount entered on the right side and circled from the right, and they exited from the left, except for one to whom something had happened. Rabbi Sharon Brous, in her book, The Amen Effect, helps us understand exactly what this teaching is saying and its significance. Imagine you have come to pilgrimage to the temple in ancient Jerusalem. Thousands of people are at this most holy of places. The crowd enters the courtyard and begins walking to the right, circling counterclockwise to the exit on the left. But someone who is suffering, the text tells us, the grieving, the lonely, the sick, one to whom something has happened, enters from the left and walks in the opposite direction. They begin circling clockwise. And this symbolizes how we can feel when we are hurting. Every step we take feels like we're going against the current, like we are out of sync with the rest of the world. The Mishnah goes on to describe what happened next. Those walking to the right ask those circling to the left, "Why are you circling in the opposite direction?" They reply, "I am in mourning." Upon hearing this, they are blessed with those words, "May the one who dwells in this house comfort you." What a profound and powerful ritual. When you're suffering, you root your suffering in the context of care. Suffering and mourning can cause us to want to just stay home, to be away from others. But our tradition encourages just the opposite. Comfort, it says, comes betoch, in the midst of others. And Rabbi Brous goes on to share a tragic story from her community in California. It's a terrible story of loss, but it is also a story that shows how living betoch, in the midst of others, can bring comfort. Colin and Gail Campbell were on a road trip with their children, Ruby and Hart, who are just 17 and 14 years old. They were driving down a desert road when a drunk driver crashed into their car. Ruby and Hart were killed, but Colin and Gail miraculously survived, walking away with broken ribs and shattered hearts. It was a terrible and tragic loss. How could they ever go on? Colin expressed their feelings like this. After Ruby and Hart were killed, I didn't really want to live without them. It felt like I was drifting, untethered, and disconnected. Everything was unreal, like we'd been robbed. The universe had taken them away forever, and we were helpless. It took time for Colin to articulate these words, which he did in a book he wrote 2 years after Ruby and Hart's deaths called Finding the Words, Working Through Profound Loss with Hope and Purpose. In it, Colin describes the way the Jewish mourning rituals, Kaddish and Shiva, storytelling, the laughter and the tears, the presence of community, created the container that he and Gail needed in those early days to hold their anguish and to confront the enormity of their loss. And Colin goes on to write that he and Gail came to recognize that, for them, grief is, at its essence, a communal activity. Comfort comes from being betoch, in the midst of other people, who may not know the depth of your grief, but who may also be feeling a sense of pain from your loss. I want to help you through it. He writes how hard but how necessary it is to be betoch, back in the midst of people following a loss. Listen. Actively trying to re-engage with life after loss is very challenging. We have to overcome a profound desire to curl up in a ball all alone in bed, and we also have to struggle with survivor guilt. At times, it felt as though I didn't have a right to a full life, that I was betraying Ruby and Hart and my grief if I allowed myself to feel pleasure or happiness or plan for the future without them. Just as I need to wrestle with my feelings of loss, I also need to grapple with guilt and learn to live alongside it. My grief and my guilt aren't going anywhere, so I have to learn how to navigate them both. The best way to do that is to stay engaged with life and embrace the challenges. As renowned psychiatrist and Holocaust survivor Viktor Frankl wrote, "Say yes to life." I mentioned Viktor Frankl, and I talked a lot about Chaim, life, on Rosh Hashanah. And you'll recall I mentioned that Chaim is a plural word, as if to say that life, to be lived well, to live most meaningfully, it is lived with others, betoch. Colin and Gail's tragic story helps us to understand the power of this lesson. We often think of living life with others in the good times, at the simchas, the b'nai mitzvah, the weddings, the beautiful moments, and all of that is important. But just as important, and perhaps even more so, is to live life in the plural during the difficult times as well. After we've suffered the loss of a loved one, or when we're dealing with illness or some other type of loss. This can cause us to circle to the left, like our ancestors who were hurting did in the time of the temple. Sometimes we too need to make ourselves vulnerable to signal that we need help. Other times it requires us to be like those who circle to the right, attuning ourselves to the needs of those struggling to move against the current of grief. The truth is that we all walk to the right or to the left over the course of our lives. There are times that we need comfort, and there are times where we're called upon to give comfort. Today we might walk in one direction, and tomorrow we might walk in the other. We never know. But what we do know is that if we live betoch, as part of a community, as part of a people, we can be there for each other, no matter which direction our lives may take. Though we do not say Hamakom Yinachem at Yizkor, we do say something that has a similar power. And it adds another layer to the meaning of betoch, affirming that we can continue to be in the midst of those we love even after they have left this world. When we recite El Malei Rachamim, the memorial prayer for everyone we remember today, we'll say, Utzror b'tzror chaim et nishmotehem. May their souls be bound up in the bonds of eternal life. Commentaries say that the Tzror Chaim is a holder for all of our eternal souls. It is where souls are kept safe and together in the midst of all souls at God's side for eternity. But there is more. The bond of life is also the bond of memory. We live betoch in the midst of those who are present today in person, as well as those who are present today in memory. They live in our midst, and we live in theirs. Whose life is bound up with yours? Who are you thinking about at Yizkor? And to help us feel the presence of those with whom we are betoch as we prepare for Yizkor, I invite you to join me once again this year in a visualization exercise if you feel comfortable. I ask you to make sure you're comfortable in your seats, and when you're ready, close your eyes. You can put your hands in your lap and breathe deeply. Now imagine yourself sitting at a large table. It's your family's holiday table, perhaps from growing up or maybe more recently. Look around at the chairs. In each chair sits someone you love. Take time to look at each face around the table. See them looking back at you. You smile at them, and they smile back. Now go to each person, and as you do, say something. It could be words of gratitude or an apology, or words of love, or ask for their advice, or open yourself up to their wisdom. Tell them what they meant to you. Now look around the table once more and experience yourself betoch, in the midst of your family and dear friends, the people you remember today. And when you're ready, you can open your eyes. Hold on to those images as we move into Yizkor, which we say together sitting betoch, in the midst of our TBS family, each one of us remembering our loved ones, finding comfort in each other as we recall those whom we miss so dearly today. And now appreciate being betoch the Jewish people, being part of one community in the midst of thousands around the world, all of us remembering together, wrapped up in the Surah Chaim, in the bond of life, in the bond of memory that we experience here betoch, in the midst of our lives, in the lives of our community and our people, and all those who we remember, as now we are ready for Yizkor.